Mass media seems to have always been on the side of Kinsey and his philosophy. A philosophy carried out by Hugh Hefner in 1953 when he launched Playboy magazine. That same year, Kinsey released his K-Bomb, Sexual Behavior in the Human Female, the second book in his report on human sexuality. Hefner made an immediate association between his soft porn magazine and Kinsey's research.
I referred to it in the first introduction to the first issue and called it the other great book that was coming out in 1953. Max Lerner, the historian and a good friend of mine, said that Kinsey was the researcher and I was the pamphleteer. And it's an interesting way of looking at it. I certainly do think that in a very real way, the sexual revolution began in 1953, with the second book and the beginning of Playboy.
Hugh Hefner had been under the influence of Kinseyan philosophy since the release of the male volume in 1948. He had even written about it in a college publication years before he started Playboy magazine. Half a century later, in Playboy's 50th anniversary issue, Hefner paid special tribute to Alfred Kinsey, celebrating the man who had helped him launch the sexual revolution. But Playboy represented more than just nude photos of the girl next door. According to Hefner, the magazine was, quote, a statement of rebellion without question. The first official Playboy playmate was named Janet Pilgrim, directly intended to mock America's Puritan heritage. In time, Hefner would publish the Playboy philosophy, a new morality for the post-Kinsey era. Just as Kinsey had gone all over the country, preaching the message of sexual reform, Hefner followed his example, giving speeches, appearing on talk shows, and speaking in public forums as the pamphleteer for Kinsey's sexual revolution.
So what you're saying, Mr. Hefner, is that we should encourage premarital sexual relations?
I think that we should encourage the notion that sex can be right and proper in marriage or out of marriage.
In time, Hefner set up the Playboy Foundation, which became, quote, one of the major sources of income for the Kinsey Institute. But was Hefner's sexual revolution simply about giving consenting adults the right to alternative lifestyles? Or was there a hidden agenda within the pages of Playboy, one that would further the child sexual abuse also found in the Kinsey reports? In 1983, Dr. Judith Reisman was appointed by the Juvenile Division of the Department of Justice to investigate the images in Playboy, along with Penthouse and Hustler magazines. The reason for the study was due to the rise of violent sex crimes committed by young adults against even younger children. Those who were committing these crimes were often found to have copies of Playboy and Penthouse magazines in their possession. But what could be in these magazines, often thought to be harmless, that would compel young teenage boys to commit violent sex crimes against other children? Dr. Reisman had done a radio interview with Pat Buchanan about her research into Kinsey and the soft porn industry. Soon after, she was contacted by the Department of Justice as part of a joint effort with the FBI.
I got a call from the Department of Justice when they heard me on the Buchanan program, and I was saying, you're going to have an increase in sexual crimes by children against children and by adults against children. You cannot do the kind of programming of people's brains, minds, memories, and bodies. The connection between the brain goes all the way down, from the retina all the way down the central nervous system and into the genitals. You can't show people those kinds of pictures and arouse them in that way and not think that they're going to act out either positively on somebody who agrees or negatively on somebody who doesn't agree. That's what's going to happen, and you just simply can't do that to billions of people at one time, to masses of a population.
In her Department of Justice study, Dr. Reisman revealed that from 1953 to 1982, Playboy, and eventually Penthouse and Hustler magazines had published approximately 9,000 images of children involved in sexual scenarios, an average of about 8 to 9 images per issue.
And I showed the development of the child in those images, in cartoons, in photographs, and the use of the child as a sexual object by the observer, by the viewer. And I said, you know, your average guy thinks he's buying a girly magazine, you know, a magazine that's just pictures of pretty girls. And he has no idea that the messages that are being pumped into him, neurophysiologically, if you will, all the way down and through his system, include images of sexual assault of children. And he, as the viewer, becomes the predator. That's just the way the human brain works.
The following are images from Dr. Reisman's presentation at the FBI Training Center in Quantico. Please understand, the most severe images we are unable to show you. Dr. Reisman demonstrates how the cartoon imagery of children progressed into real-life images, either of children or of legal-aged women who were made to look like obviously underage girls. Over time, the scenarios suggested greater degrees of sexual aggression and violence, including murder.
That cartoon says, can you read it? Well, anyway, it says, thank you, good night, Betty Lou, thanks for a really swell evening. Now here, we do see the penis. One of the few cartoons that we have the male penis. Of course, it appears that the gentleman has murdered Betty Lou. She's tied up in one of these leaf bags. Now, I will challenge any of you in the next week or 2 weeks or month or 2 months or 3 months to drive along a road and see a garbage bag tied up like that, a leaf bag tied up like that, and not somehow flash back to this kind of fantasy image. Now, for you, it may not be a problem, but we have reason to suspect that for some publics, that kind of continual flashback in our subconscious constitutes a real problem.
Dr. Reisman believes that millions of American men have been conditioned for decades by such imagery, often struggling with an addiction that they don't understand and cannot escape. The addiction to porn has now been handed down to America's children, giving their young minds a perverse view of reality and of the relationships between men and women. With mainstream soft porn magazines having normalized the idea of sex and violence against children, could this be, as Dr. Reisman has taught, the reason for the continued rise of child abductions, child molestation, and even child murder in our country? And are these materials, which are often defended under the First Amendment, the real liberty that America's founding fathers fought and died for?
Recently read on, I think, Fox News. You know, one of the newscasters there has got a blurb or an article right now on the internet. You know, are our children safe? Is this ever going to end? And I know for a fact it will not end, and it is only going to get worse unless something is done about pornography.
The most damaging kinds of pornography are those that involve violence and sexual violence, because the wedding of those two forces, as I know only too well, brings about behavior that is just too terrible to describe.
After seeing her presentation at their training center at Quantico, the FBI ordered all copies of Playboy and Penthouse magazines to be removed from the FBI Post-Exchange. A similar reaction occurred with the Southland 7-Eleven Corporation, which had been a major distributor of Playboy and Penthouse. But in 1986, After seeing Dr. Reisman's presentation, the 7-Eleven chain refused to carry the publications, costing the soft porn giants untold millions in annual revenue. Dr. Reisman herself describes what the FBI and 7-Eleven were really responding to.
That what they were getting in their house, what their sons were seeing, what the uncles were seeing, what the boyfriends were seeing, was how to sexually abuse a child and laugh about it.
During World War II, the Nazis used cartoons to condition the minds of Germans against the Jewish people, creating an exaggerated and comical identity that ultimately led to their persecution and mass murder. Dr. Reisman believes a similar kind of conditioning has happened through the use of cartoon imagery that depict the rape and abuse of children.
Children are being sexually assaulted, they're being trampled on, they're being kidnapped, they're being murdered. And I have all of those kinds of cartoons.
Some of the following cartoons are disturbing, such as this image from Playboy of an infant child masturbating with a title that reads, "Getting Off." Not surprisingly, the cartoon supports the Kinseyan view that children are sexual from birth. Children are often shown to be the aggressors, as in this image of a small child speaking to an older man with a candy cane. The caption reads, "No thank you, nice man. I don't want to go for a ride in your car. Why don't we just go up to my place and BALL?" This image from Penthouse has 3 young girls in conversation. The one with the candy cane says, "Yeah, and he gives you one of these just for straight sex, no deviations." This Playboy image is of a young girl putting her dress back on. She says to the older man in the bathrobe, "You call that being molested?" In this scene, a young girl is in bed with an older man. On the phone she says, "Hello, Mommy. I met this nice political leader from the moral majority on Capitol Hill." Incest is another prominent theme of the magazines. This Playboy image shows a young girl in bed with an obviously older man. The caption reads, "Everything's fine, Mama. Uncle William and I are playing a game called Consequences." This cartoon from Hustler magazine is of a father molesting his high school daughter. She says, "Daddy, not only is what you're doing illegal, it's being done badly." Many scenarios involve characters that most children recognize, such as Santa Claus and the Wizard of Oz characters, in which Dorothy is either raped or molested by her companions. In this cartoon, the Santa Claus has an ecstatic look on his face because the little girl sitting on his lap has her hand inside his pants. In this one, the Santa Claus has his pants around his ankles as he rapes an obviously frightened little girl on his lap. The Santa images become especially violent, even bloody, such as this one, where the Santa character has just murdered a child with a machine gun. The child's bloody body lies on the floor. The caption reads, "That'll teach you to be a good boy." There are literally thousands of such cartoons, cataloged and analyzed by Dr. Reisman. These images have been published by the soft porn industry for more than half a century. But by far the most disturbing collection comes from Larry Flint's Hustler magazine. For years, Hustler published the cartoon Chester the Molester.
It's part of a series in which this man was attacking children.
The classic Chester cartoon is this one, where Chester sits naked in a chair with 3 young girls who have obviously been kidnapped, bound, and raped. The caption coming from the TV reads, "It is 11 o'clock. Do you know where your children are?" Dr. Reisman believes that because of suggestive imagery like this, many parents don't know where their children are. Sadly, some of them will never see their children again. Chester the Molester was the invention of Hustler's head cartoonist, Dwayne Tinsley, shown here in the 1985 documentary, Rated X, where he explains the character of Chester.
And Chester's the character that I do for the magazine. You'd have this dirty old guy that would do anything to trap a young girl.
When you say young girl, how young do you mean?
Well, at that particular time, he was after the younger ones, 10, 12. His idea is that he wants to get all little girls.
Look again carefully at this disturbing image, where Chester is writing information on a notepad, almost as if he were recording data like one of Kinsey's pedophiles.
First of all, if he's going to trap a little girl, you know, the idea for him would be to knock her out or something. I don't know. I mean, he didn't have to actually use a club or a bat. He could have smacked her, but just the idea of the bat is a little goofier. Would better than a baseball bat. I mean, it was just always with him. He was going to hit the little girl over the head trap her, hit the little girl with his club, and drag her off to his lair, as it were. Whether she was going to have fun or not, it was never established.
This same attitude seems to have carried into Tinsley's own life. 4 years after appearing in this documentary, Tinsley's daughter would testify in court that she had been repeatedly raped by Tinsley himself. In 1989, Dwayne Tinsley was tried and convicted as a child rapist, in part because of the research on his work done by Dr. Reisman.
There's just no question at all that those cartoons that we showed, that they showed the jury, were absolute evidence of the crimes he had committed on his daughter, as testified by his daughter.
During the trial, the jury was shown one of Tinsley's cartoons, which depicted a father molesting his teenage daughter. The caption reads, "Gee, I'd love to go to the drive-in, Tommy, but my dad has some, extra household chores for me tonight." In court, Tinsley's daughter claimed that her father showed her this cartoon and said to her, "This is you and me." The Associated Press reported that Tinsley often said, "You can't write this stuff all the time if you don't experience it."
There's no normal human being that can draw those things, that can put that kind of idea out there to the public, who is not experiencing that themselves. No, that's just not going to happen.
But Tinsley was not alone. His employer, Larry Flynt, was also accused by his daughter, Tanya Flint Vega, in her book, Hustled, in which she claimed that her father used the Chester the Molester cartoons to introduce her to the idea of sex, and then raped her when she was only 9 years old. Like many pedophiles, Larry Flynt was never charged with a crime and openly denied his daughter's allegations. Even Hugh Hefner is said to have been guilty of statutory rape. According to biographer Russell Miller in his book, Bunny, The Real Story of Playboy, Hefner himself enjoyed making love to a schoolgirl who had attended his daughter's Sweet 16 birthday party. Miller's evidence was based on the testimony of the staff that worked in the Playboy mansion at the time. As with Larry Flynt, Hefner was never charged with a crime. A major breakthrough for Hefner's Playboy magazine and child pornographers in general was the film Pretty Baby, starring Brooke Shields, a film briefly remembered during the recent controversy over the images of 15-year-old Miley Cyrus. Pretty Baby was the story of a 12-year-old girl who grows up with a prostitute mother and ends up losing her virginity in a whorehouse. People magazine ran a story saying Brooke Shields, 12, stirs a furor over child porn in films. Playboy featured images from the film, along with an interview with the film's director, Louis Malle. In the interview, Malle said, "When Playboy requested a photo that would express my personal vision of eroticism, I sent a shot of my 2-year-old daughter, Justine, naked. This led to the photos above of Brooke Shields, whom I cast in the title role of my new film, Pretty Baby." As early as 1971, Reader's Digest published an article titled "What Sex Offenders Say About Pornography." The article cited the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports, stating that between 1960 and 1969, the number of forcible rapes committed by males under 18 had increased by 86%. it could be concluded that some force impelling towards sex crime has been operating on younger males in the United States. The period described by the FBI was one in which Playboy magazine had been the principal form of widespread pornography in America, especially the kind that would find its way into the hands of underage males. Then in the 1980s, the Surgeon General C. Everett Koop called pornography a clear and present danger to American public health. And who could forget the disturbing warning given by serial killer Ted Bundy in his final interview with Dr. James Dobson just hours before his execution in 1989.
Listen, I'm no social scientist, and I haven't done a survey. I mean, I don't pretend that I know what John Q. Citizen thinks about this. But I've lived in prison for a long time now. And I've met a lot of men who were motivated to commit violence just like me. And without exception, every one of them was deeply involved in pornography, without question, without exception, deeply influenced and consumed by an addiction to pornography.
Despite these warnings, the so-called soft porn industry has been normalized in America, partly because some of the most powerful social and political leaders of the last half-century have given interviews and appeared in these magazines, helping to make them part of America's mainstream. Perhaps most famous was Jimmy Carter's Playboy interview in 1976 as a presidential candidate. While ultimately considered a political blunder, it undoubtedly sent a message of acceptability to the up-and-coming generation, to those who, in time, would end up running the country. As such, what sort of decisions would they make on behalf of America's women and children? It is also important to consider that the warnings from Ted Bundy and the Surgeon General were given years before the widespread use of the Internet, where today pornography is available to the masses like never before in history.
The Internet, I'm not trying to say is a real negative and dark thing. There's a lot of positive and good things coming out of the Internet, but people need to be aware of the dark element that the Internet provides to people. And it's in a very private, secret place, so people can keep can be anonymous. Whereas, 20, 30 years ago, to go to a porn shop, you'd have to go to a seedy part of town and people would recognize you. It's not that way anymore. It comes right into your house. And that's why I think it's so dangerous.
The idea that pornography doesn't really hurt anyone is a fallacious argument. How many marriages, how many tens of thousands, perhaps millions of people are hurting in their relationships because of pornography?
And the guy who watches porn is basically probably going to get addicted to the porn. And if he does ever get married, sex is never going to be right because he's going to be so obsessed with the pornography that's not even real anyways. I believe that God intended sex to be between a man and a woman, a husband and a wife.
Can you explain the images on the computer?
This is nothing right here.
Just because you're not out with some other woman doesn't mean that you're not being unfaithful to our marriage.
And what else do you need? What do you need?
I want my husband to be faithful. I want my husband to be a father to his children. I don't want him in his office watching pornography and telling me that he's trying to meet deadlines.
It's said that the greatest myth about pornography is that nobody gets hurt. Some even argue that porn is a healthy outlet for men and women alike. But has this really proven to be the case? Or does an addiction to porn create a kind of shadow person, someone who ends up leading a double life? One that the rest of those in his world can only wonder about. And when his dark secrets are finally brought into the light, what will be revealed? One who understands the dark temptations of pornography is former Penthouse producer J. Gator Henry, who claims he narrowly escaped a lifestyle that became so extreme it almost landed him in prison.
I'll say that, but for the grace of God, there go I when I see these men that are being arrested on the news.
As a former producer for Penthouse magazine, Gator rubbed elbows with some of the big celebrities in Hollywood, including Ozzy Osbourne and Pamela Anderson. And as you would expect, his work exposed him to countless Penthouse models.
Man, it was an ego rush to be around the most beautiful women in the world and then running around naked. And to a lot of men in America, I had the dream job. I mean, I was their hero. I was doing what everybody thought was the greatest thing in the world that a man could be doing for a profession.
Gator believes his addiction to pornography began with a troubled childhood.
My uncle had molested me when I was a child, and he ended up confessing that to me prior to his death from AIDS a few years ago, so I had that event in my life, and then I also remember when I was young finding a penthouse in my father's bedroom closet, and boy, I thought that was the greatest thing since sliced bread when I found that thing, and when you're at that age and everything else, and so I immediately was hooked on the whole thing. So it's kind of interesting that everything turned around and ended up working for Penthouse. And pornography, especially printed pornography, people think that Penthouse or Playboy or whatever is innocent. And I'm here to say that it's absolutely not. Having also a drug past myself, marijuana is a stepping stone in the drug world, Penthouse magazine or Playboy magazine is a stepping stone in the porn world. You start there, it's not going to end there.
Gator claims that the steps on his journey through pornography led him into deeper and darker levels of perversion. Eventually, he found himself on the brink of criminal behavior.
It got so bad where I would get on the internet. Again, I was just consumed. The ages of the girls I was looking at, in order for me to get the rush and to get that tingle, that buzz that I wanted to get from the sexual side of it, what happens is you start looking at younger and younger images, younger and younger pictures of girls. And what happened for me one day was, the thought just slammed to me that I probably have done things and probably had images on my computer at that time that could put me in prison. I look at these men who abduct these young girls and they molest them and kill them, bury them alive or whatever they do, stab them multiple times and stuff. And I know that those men, like me, they didn't wake up, they didn't start off, they didn't grow up as a little boy saying, oh, my ambition in life is grow up to be a child molester and killer. And I know for a fact that everything in the marrow of my bones, because I've been there, I've walked and lived it, that pornography took them to that place where just your average Joe comes to a place in his mind and in his being where he's so consumed with that fulfillment of that lustful thought and pleasure, with that thought that he has to fulfill it. And the fantasy becomes so overpowering and so all-consuming. And those are the guys that go out and take these girls.
Thankfully, Gator Henry says that in his case, he never reached that point of criminal behavior. Today, he tells others he found strength to turn away from his dark addiction through his faith in God.
I remember it now, and I saw myself. How wretched I really was before him, and how I had sinned against him, and he'd been so merciful to me.
Dr. Judith Reisman has commented that in her more than 30 years of research, she has seen few, if any, escape their porn addiction except through anti-porn activism or faith-based programs. In Gator Henry's case, he says it was his Christian faith and the teachings he found in the Bible that kept him from becoming a sex offender.
And what what delivered me, what took me out of that, was plain and simple. Nothing but the power of Jesus Christ and the power of His Spirit through the fear of God.
That fear might be summed up in the Gospel of Luke. When speaking about children, Jesus said, "It were better for a man that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and he cast into the sea, than that he should offend one of these little ones."